The grocery store was quiet that evening, its fluorescent lights humming gently above the aisles. Outside, the sky had turned an ash gray, with clouds holding back rain that threatened to fall. Inside, a man stood frozen in front of the dairy section, clutching a carton of milk in his hands as though it were a fragile lifeline. His name was Daniel. He was in his early 30s, his hair messy, his eyes red with exhaustion, and his clothes worn from long weeks of work. He wasn't just tired, he looked utterly defeated. Daniel was a single father. Just months ago, his wife, his best friend and partner, had passed away unexpectedly after a short illness. The shock hadn't fully left him. Most days felt like he was moving through a fog, trying to hold himself together for the sake of his little girl, Mia, who was only 5 years old. Mia was everything to him. Her smile was the only light left in his life, but raising her alone, with bills piling up and his job at the warehouse barely covering expenses, was crushing him. Tonight was just another reminder of how hard it had become. The milk in his hands wasn't special. It was the cheapest brand, slightly dented at the corner, but even that seemed heavy. Daniel pulled his wallet from his pocket and stared at the few crumpled bills and coins inside. He did the math again and again, but no matter how he turned it, he didn't have enough. He had come in with hope, thinking he could manage at least a gallon of milk for Mia's cereal in the morning. But when the cashier rang up the price of the other small essentials he needed, bread, rice, and a pack of eggs, it was too much. Something had to go back. He set the milk down on the counter and whispered to himself, "Maybe I can stretch what's left until payday." That was when she noticed him. Her name was Grace. She worked as a maid, cleaning houses for families in the nicer part of town. She was tall, with deep brown skin that seemed to glow under the store lights. Her hair tied back neatly after a long day of work. Her uniform still carried faint traces of the polish and detergent she used in her jobs. Grace was tired too. But when her eyes caught sight of Daniel's slumped shoulders and the way he reluctantly pushed the milk aside, something stirred in her heart. Grace had lived through her own storms. She knew the taste of hunger, the sting of sacrifice, the nights spent praying for a way forward. She knew what it felt like to work hard, but still never feel like it was enough. And above all, she knew the desperation in a parent's eyes when their child's needs hung in the balance. It was a look she had seen in her own mother when she was young. Daniel apologized softly to the cashier and started to put the milk back on the shelf. Grace couldn't look away. Something inside told her she couldn't let this moment pass. Without fully thinking it through, she stepped forward, her voice gentle but steady. "Sir," she said, "please, let me get that for you." But Daniel turned, startled, as though he hadn't realized anyone had been watching. His first instinct was to shake his head. No, I couldn't. You don't have to do that." His pride, worn though it was, still rose up. But Grace smiled, not out of pity, but out of genuine kindness. "I know I don't have to," she said softly. "But I want to. Please, let me." The cashier looked between them awkwardly, unsure whether to continue. Daniel hesitated, his throat tight. For a moment he considered refusing. But when he thought of Maya's face lighting up at her cereal in the morning, something inside him broke. He nodded, his eyes glassy. "Thank you," he whispered. Grace paid for the milk along with her own groceries. It was such a small act in the eyes of the world, barely a few dollars. But for Daniel it felt like the weight of the universe had been lifted off his chest. When they walked out of the store together, Daniel couldn't hold back. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "I feel like I should explain. My daughter, she's 5. Her name is Mia. She loves milk and cereal in the mornings. And I didn't have enough this time." Grace's heart softened even more. "You don't have to explain anything," she replied. "I understand more than you know." She told him about her own childhood, about how her mother worked herself to the bone cleaning houses and still struggled to put food on the table. She remembered nights when they survived on little more than bread and water, and mornings when her mother would pretend she wasn't hungry so that Grace could eat. The two of them stood in the parking lot, strangers bound together by shared hardship, by empathy. Daniel wanted to repay her, but Grace shook her head. "Don't repay me," she said firmly. "Instead, when you're in a better place one day, help someone else. That's how we keep hope alive." The rain that had been threatening finally began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. Grace pulled her coat tighter, ready to head home. Daniel held the milk close, almost as if it were sacred. Before they parted ways, Grace turned back and said, "You're doing better than you think, you know. Your little girl has a father who refuses to give up. That's more than a lot of children have." Her words struck him deeply, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, Maya sat at the small kitchen table in their modest apartment, giggling as she spooned cereal into her mouth. Her smile, wide and unguarded, filled the room with warmth. Daniel sat across from her, watching, his heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know the struggle behind that simple breakfast, and he didn't want her to. All she needed to know was that she was loved and cared for. But Grace's act of kindness didn't end there. Days later, fate brought them together again. Daniel was walking Mia home from school when he saw Grace coming down the street, carrying her cleaning supplies. Mia, with her curious little eyes, immediately ran up to her. "Hey," she chirped, her bright voice breaking the evening air. Grace laughed, crouching down to greet her. Daniel introduced them properly, and from that moment, their paths began to cross more often. Grace sometimes stopped by to check on them, bringing small things when she could. A loaf of bread, a bag of fruit, even second-hand clothes that her own nieces had outgrown. Daniel was reluctant at first, but Grace always insisted it wasn't charity. "Think of it as sharing," she'd say. "We all need each other sometimes." Over time, a bond grew, not one of romance, though there was warmth between them, but of deep friendship, of chosen family. Grace became like an aunt to Mia, someone she could laugh with and trust. And for Daniel, she became a reminder that the world still had good in it, that people could still care even when they didn't have to. Months passed, and Daniel slowly found his footing again. He picked up extra shifts, managed to pay down some debts, and even began saving a little. It wasn't easy. But with Maya's laughter and Grace's encouragement, he kept moving forward. One day, as he tucked Mia into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and said, "Daddy, we're lucky, aren't we?" Daniel smiled, his throat tight. "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" "Because we have everything we need," she murmured, drifting off. Her words broke him in the best way. Lucky. She saw their little world not through the lens of loss, but of love. And she was right. They were lucky. Because a stranger had chosen to see them, to step into their pain and offer kindness when they needed it most. Years later, when Mia grew older, Daniel told her the full story about the night Grace bought the milk. He wanted her to know the power of a single act of compassion, how it could ripple through a lifetime. Maya never forgot. She carried that lesson with her, choosing kindness whenever she could, just as Grace had asked. Because sometimes the smallest actions, buying milk, sharing bread, offering a hand, are the ones that change lives forever. And the message lingered, shining like a quiet truth. You never know what battle someone is fighting. You never know what weight they carry. But when you choose kindness, when you give without expecting anything in return, you plant seeds of hope that may bloom in ways you'll never see. Grace's unthinkable act wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was powerful. She gave more than milk that night. She gave dignity, hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity still shines. The grocery store was nearly empty that Thursday evening. The buzzing of the ceiling lights echoed against the tiled floors, and the smell of disinfectant mixed faintly with the warm scent of bread from the bakery section. It was the kind of night where people hurried in, picked up what they needed, and left quickly to escape the drizzle outside. But for one man, time seemed to stretch painfully long in front of the dairy aisle. Daniel stood there with a carton of milk in his hands, his fingers tightening around the plastic handle as though it could anchor him. His shoulders slumped, his jaw clenched, and his eyes glistened with exhaustion. His dark hair was messy, strands sticking out as though combed hastily with his hands that morning. He hadn't shaved in days, and the hollows under his eyes spoke louder than words. This was a man worn thin by life. For anyone glancing at him, it looked like an ordinary choice between brands of milk. But in Daniel's chest, a storm raged. The milk wasn't just milk. It was breakfast for his little girl Maya, who was only 5 years old. She adored her morning routine. Her pink plastic bowl, a handful of cereal, and a generous pour of milk that turned it all into her favorite meal. Every morning she would swing her little legs under the table and giggle when she made milk mustaches. For her, it was joy. For him, it was proof that he could still provide something simple and safe. But tonight, Daniel realized he couldn't even afford that. He opened his wallet again, though he had counted it at least 4 times already. A few crumpled bills, some coins, not nearly enough. He muttered under his breath, "Come on. There's got to be a way." His throat tightened as he thought of Mia waking up and asking innocently, "Daddy, where's the milk?" He couldn't bear to tell her they didn't have any. The cashier cleared her throat politely, waiting. Daniel looked at the small pile of items on the conveyor belt. Bread, a bag of rice, a carton of eggs, and the milk. He had to make a choice. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the milk away. "I'll just leave this," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. Behind him in line, Grace noticed. Grace had been working all day, scrubbing floors and wiping counters in houses where families lived in comfort. She wore her maid's uniform still, neatly pressed but smelling faintly of polish and soap. Her long day had left her tired, but when her gaze landed on Daniel, something inside her stirred. She saw the way his shoulders sagged, the way he clutched his wallet like it was both a shield and a confession, and the way his eyes lingered on the milk even after he pushed it aside. Grace knew that look. She had seen it in her own mother's eyes years ago, when money was always tight, when food was sometimes a prayer rather than a guarantee. Memories flashed through her mind, her mother whispering apologies as she watered down soup so it would stretch another day, her mother giving her the last piece of bread and pretending she wasn't hungry. That same quiet desperation lived in Daniel's face now, and it broke her heart. Before she could second-guess herself, Grace stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice calm but warm. Daniel turned, startled, his pride immediately bristling. "Please, let me get that for you." He blinked, confused. No, you don't have to. Really, it's fine." He gave a half-hearted laugh that cracked at the edges. "I'll manage." But Grace shook her head, her eyes steady. "I know I don't have to. But I want to. It's just milk, but for your little one, I can tell it means more. Please let me." The cashier waited awkwardly, frozen in the moment. Daniel swallowed hard, torn between pride and desperation. For weeks he had told himself he didn't need anyone's help, that he could do this alone. But in that moment, the image of Maya's smile was stronger than his pride. His eyes grew wet as he finally nodded. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Grace gave a small smile. She added the milk back to the pile and paid for it along with her own groceries. To her it wasn't much, just a few extra dollars. But to Daniel it felt like a lifeline, a reminder that he wasn't invisible, that someone cared enough to notice. They left the store together, the rain now coming down in soft sheets. Daniel held the milk as though it were precious treasure. Outside, under the flickering street lamp, he turned to her. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "I feel like I should explain. My daughter, Maya, she's 5. She loves her cereal in the mornings, and I just..." His voice faltered. Grace touched his arm lightly, stopping him. "You don't owe me an explanation," she said. "But I understand, more than you know." Then she told him a piece of her story, about how her mother had raised her and her siblings alone, working long hours cleaning houses, often skipping meals to feed her children. She remembered the weight her mother carried, and the kindness of strangers who sometimes helped them get through. "Those small acts," she said softly, "they kept us going. Tonight, it's my turn to pass it on." Daniel felt something shift inside him, a strange mix of gratitude and humility. "I wish I could repay you somehow," he said. Grace shook her head firmly. "Don't repay me. Just, when life gives you the chance, help someone else. That's enough." The rain picked up, and they parted ways. Daniel walked home clutching the milk, his heart lighter than it had been in months. The next morning, Maya's laughter filled their small apartment as she dipped her spoon into her cereal. "Daddy, look!" she giggled, her upper lip coated in milk. Daniel laughed too, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. She had no idea the weight behind that carton of milk, and he didn't want her to. All she needed to know was that she was loved, that she was safe. But that wasn't the end of the story. The weeks after that small act of kindness turned into months. And though Daniel and Grace hadn't planned it, their paths kept crossing. Sometimes it was at the grocery store again, sometimes on the street when Daniel picked Mia up from school, and sometimes by coincidence at the park where Maya liked to play. At first, Daniel felt awkward whenever Grace appeared. A part of him still carried the weight of embarrassment from that night. The night a stranger had to buy him milk for his child. But Grace never made him feel small. She never brought it up, never teased, never pitied. Instead, she treated him as though she'd always known him, as though what she had done was as natural as holding a door open. Mia, of course, adored her right away. Miss Grace, she would squeal whenever she saw her. Grace would crouch down, smiling as she listened to Mia chatter about school, about her dolls, about the dreams she had for her next birthday. It was as if a bond had formed instantly, one Maya had been missing without even knowing it. Daniel began to notice how Grace carried herself. Despite her own struggles, she always smiled, always asked about others, always had a way of bringing warmth into the room. He found himself wanting to learn from her, to borrow some of that quiet strength. One evening, after walking Mia home from the park, Daniel invited Grace inside for tea. Their apartment was small, one bedroom that Mia claimed as hers, a living room with a sagging couch, and a tiny kitchen that always smelled faintly of pasta sauce or rice. Grace didn't comment on the worn furniture or the peeling wallpaper. She sat with them at the table as though it were the most welcoming home in the world. That night, Daniel opened up more than he expected. He told her about his wife, how quickly he had lost her, and how lost he had felt since. His voice cracked when he admitted that sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he worried he wasn't enough for Maya. "What if I fail her?" he whispered. "What if she grows up thinking I didn't try hard enough?" Grace's eyes softened. "Daniel," she said firmly, "you're already giving her the most important thing, love. She doesn't need perfection. She needs a father who shows up, who keeps going even when it's hard. And from what I can see, you're doing exactly that." Her words settled deep in his chest, like a balm to wounds he had carried alone. For the first time in a long while, he believed he might actually be enough. From then on, Grace became part of their little world. She would bring over extra food when she cooked too much, and Mia would run to her with drawings she'd made. Sometimes, when Daniel was stuck working late shifts, Grace would watch Mia for him, reading her stories until she fell asleep. What started with a carton of milk grew into a friendship, then into something even stronger, a chosen family. Daniel never stopped working hard. He picked up extra shifts at the warehouse, saved what he could, and slowly pulled himself out of the shadow of debt. But the difference now was that he no longer felt alone. Grace's presence, steady and selfless, gave him courage. She never asked for anything in return. All she wanted was to see them standing on their feet again. One cold December evening, snowflakes dusted the sidewalks as Daniel and Mia walked home with Grace. Maya clutched Grace's hand and skipped between them, humming a Christmas song she had learned at school. The sight made Daniel smile, though his throat tightened with emotion. When they reached the apartment, Daniel paused at the door and turned to Grace. "I never told you this properly," he said quietly, "but that night in the store, you didn't just buy milk. You gave me hope. You reminded me that I wasn't invisible. I'll never forget that." Her Grace looked at him, her breath forming a cloud in the frosty air. "And I never told you this," she replied, "but helping you that night healed something in me too. For years, I carried the memory of watching my mother struggle alone. I always wished someone had stepped in for her the way I could step in for you. That night, it felt like I was honoring her. So thank you, Daniel, for letting me help." They stood in silence for a moment, the snow falling gently around them. Inside the apartment, Mia had already run ahead, laughing as she tried to catch flakes on her tongue. Daniel and Grace shared a quiet smile, and though nothing needed to be said, both knew this was no longer just about a carton of milk. This was about the way strangers could become family, about how kindness could ripple through lives and change everything. Years passed, and Mia grew. She became a bright, determined young woman, always remembering the lessons her father and Grace had taught her. When she graduated high school, she gave a speech where she mentioned them both. "My father showed me what it means to never give up," she said proudly. "And Miss Grace showed me the power of kindness, that even the smallest act can change someone's life forever." The audience applauded, but Daniel and Grace simply looked at each other, tears in their eyes. They knew exactly what moment she was talking about. Because sometimes the world tells us that only grand gestures matter, that only wealth or fame can change lives. But the truth is different. Sometimes, change begins with something as simple as buying milk for a stranger. Sometimes, the unthinkable act is not what shocks the world, but what heals a heart. And so the story ended not with one person saving another, but with two lives forever intertwined by compassion. Grace gave Daniel and Maya a gift that money could never buy: hope, dignity, and proof that love still exists in unexpected places. And Daniel carried that gift with him for the rest of his life, passing it on whenever he could, just as Grace had asked. Because kindness, once given, never really ends. It keeps moving forward, hand to hand, heart to heart, shaping a better world one small act at a time. Final message for YouTube narration. You never know what someone else is going through. That father in the grocery store, that mother at the bus stop, that neighbor you barely notice. Each one might be carrying a burden heavier than you can imagine. But you have the power to lift it, even just for a moment. So when you can, choose kindness. Even the smallest act can become the unthinkable miracle someone has been waiting for.